My mother-in-law tried to steal the house I inherited from my uncle. She hired fake lawyers, filed fraudulent lawsuits, and even broke into my property. But when police arrested her in front of the whole family and the judge humiliated her in court, her reputation was destroyed forever. I'm 35 years old. I'm a lawyer, although almost nobody in my family knows it because it was never something I liked to go around announcing, and I've been married to Stacy for 6 years now. You know, one of those relationships where everything is pretty calm and normal until it isn't. About 2 years ago, I inherited a little beach house from my uncle. Rest in peace. And honestly, I thought it was going to be something nice, like a place to go on weekends to disconnect and stuff. But I had no idea that this property was going to become the center of such an absurd family drama that sometimes I can't even believe it myself when I think about it. The thing is that my mother-in-law, Patty, Stacy's mom, basically went crazy trying to steal the house from me, and when I say steal, I'm not exaggerating. She literally tried to use fraud, fake lawsuits, trespassing, and basically any manipulative tactic you can think of to keep something that was never hers. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand how something as simple as inheriting a property turned into this 2-year nightmare. My uncle was a lifelong single guy, never had kids, and basically I was like his favorite nephew because we spent quite a bit of time together when I was a kid. He had this little beach house, nothing fancy really, like a small but cozy house about 60 miles from where Patty lives, far enough away that it was a real escape, but not so far that it was impossible to go occasionally. When my uncle died 2 years ago, he left me the house in his will, and honestly it surprised me because I wasn't expecting anything, but it also made me super happy because I had a lot of memories of that place. Stacy was excited too. You know, we talked about how we could fix it up a bit, go on long weekends, maybe in the future even live there when we retired or something. Everything was nice and simple, or so I thought. The first few months after inheriting the house, everything was fine. We'd go occasionally, clean, do some minor repairs, normal stuff. Patty knew about the house, obviously. Stacy had told her because, well, she's her mom, and at that point, things between them were pretty normal. Not perfect, but there weren't any major red flags either. Patty made some weird comments from the beginning, like, oh, how nice it must be to have a beach house, or I always wanted something like that. But honestly, I didn't pay much attention to them because I thought she was just making casual conversation. Looking back, I should have seen it coming because Patty always was one of those people who thinks she's entitled to everything, you know? That type of mother-in-law who has an opinion about every decision you make and thinks she's always right about absolutely everything, but I never thought she'd go this far with this. Things started getting weird like 6 months after I inherited the property. Patty started showing up at the house unannounced, like literally driving 60 miles just to drop by. And when we'd ask her what she was doing there, she always had some half-baked excuse like, oh, I was in the area visiting a friend, or I wanted to see how you were doing with the repairs. At first, Stacy and I thought maybe she was just being nice or wanted to spend time with us, but then we started noticing she was asking super specific questions about the property, like how much it was worth, if we had the title documents, if we'd done any legal paperwork, things that honestly weren't her business. One day, I found her literally going through drawers in the house when she thought we weren't there. And when I asked her what she was doing, she told me she was looking for a glass of water, which obviously didn't make sense because the glasses are in the kitchen and she was in the study where we kept important documents. It was at that moment I started suspecting something wasn't right. You know, that feeling that someone's scheming something but you don't have concrete proof yet. I mentioned my concerns to Stacy and she told me her mom had always been a bit nosy, but she didn't think it was anything serious. I decided to install some security cameras in the house, not just because of Patty, but because, well, it's a property we leave alone most of the time, and it seemed prudent to me. I also asked Frank, a super nice retired neighbor who lived next door, to let me know if he saw anything weird, and basically gave him my number, telling him that if anything strange happened to call me immediately. Frank turned out to be a total blessing in this whole story, honestly. About 2 weeks after installing the cameras, Frank called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said, Marcus, your mother-in-law is here again and she's doing weird things. I checked the cameras from my phone, and sure enough, there was Patty, entering the house with a key she'd obviously copied at some point without our permission, and what I saw left me frozen. She was taking pictures of everything. measuring rooms with a tape measure, and the most disturbing thing was that she had a folder with documents she was comparing with things in the house. I saved all the video, obviously, and when Stacy got home that night, I showed her the recordings. My wife went pale, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing, and told me she was going to talk to her mom immediately to ask her what the hell she was doing. The confrontation with Patty was a total disaster. Stacy called her and asked her directly about the visits and the copied key, and Patty basically acted like it was no big deal. I said something like, "Oh, I just wanted to make sure the house was being well taken care of, and you guys are so busy I thought I could help." When Stacy mentioned we'd seen her reviewing documents and taking measurements, Patty got super defensive and started with the typical drama of, "I can't believe you don't trust me and I'm just trying to be a good mother and mother-in-law." We asked her to return the key and stop going to the property without our permission, and she said yes, but you could tell in her voice she was furious. I knew this wasn't going to end there. I had that feeling in my stomach that things were going to get worse before they got better. I wasn't wrong. About a month later, on a Saturday morning, Stacy and I were at the beach house doing some work in the yard when suddenly Patty showed up with a guy who introduced himself as Todd, supposedly a lawyer. Patty had this super weird smile on her face, like that expression of someone who thinks they just won something, and Todd was carrying a briefcase all professional. They told me they needed to talk to me about the property and that it was important, and I basically already knew it was going to be something bad, but I wanted to see how far they were willing to go. We sat down in the living room, and Todd took out a bunch of papers, started talking about how there was a legal dispute over the property and that, according to his records, Patty had rights to the house because supposedly she had contributed financially to its maintenance and improvements for years. I sat there listening to all this garbage, trying not to laugh because it was so absurd it almost seemed like a bad movie. Stacy was in total shock, looking at her mom like she didn't recognize her, and Patty kept that satisfied face thinking she had me cornered. Todd kept talking, saying they had documents proving Patty's contributions and that the best thing for everyone would be for me to sign a partial transfer of the property to avoid a long and costly legal battle. He pulled out some papers that were supposedly receipts of payments Patty had made for repairs on the house, and that's when I decided it was time to end this farce. I told them, with the calmest voice possible, that there were several problems with what they were saying. First, that Patty had never contributed a single cent to the property because I had all the real receipts for every payment I'd made since I inherited the house, and I could prove every transaction. Second, that the documents Todd was showing were obviously forged because the dates didn't match the real timeline and the names of the supposed companies that had done the work didn't even exist. I'd verified it. And third, and this was the best part, I told Todd it was funny that he introduced himself as a lawyer when a quick search in the state bar registry showed there was no Todd with his last name, licensed to practice. Patty's face completely fell apart, like she went from that confident smile to pure panic in seconds. Then I dropped the bomb on them. I told them that coincidentally I was also a lawyer, something Patty had never known because I never liked to make a show of my profession at family gatherings, and that everything they'd tried to do was fraud on multiple levels. I explained that I had recordings of Patty entering the property without permission, that I'd saved all and the videos of her unauthorized visits, that I had copies of the real property documents proving everything was in my name without any legal dispute, and that they'd basically just committed several crimes in front of me, including attempted fraud, document forgery, and impersonation of a legal professional. Todd literally got up and left the house without saying another word. I guess he realized the scam had failed and didn't want to be there when things got worse. Patty sat there, opening and closing her mouth like a fish. Not knowing what to say, Stacy exploded. Never, in the 6 years we'd been together, had I seen her so angry. She yelled at her mom, how dare she do something like this, that she was trying to steal from her own son-in-law, that she'd hired a fake lawyer to commit fraud, and basically told her she was crazy. Patty tried to defend herself with the classic, I just wanted what was best for the family, and that house should be for everyone. But Stacy wasn't buying any of it. She told her to leave immediately and never show up at the property again, and that if she did, we'd call the police. Patty left in a fury, screaming that we were going to regret it and that this wasn't over. And honestly, at that moment I thought maybe she'd finally give up, but oh, surprise, I was completely wrong. What followed was a family smear campaign that would have impressed any corrupt politician, seriously. Patty started calling all the relatives, telling them a completely distorted version of the story, saying I was an evil and manipulative lawyer who had deceived her, that I'd stolen something that legitimately belonged to her, and that I was controlling Stacy and alienating her from her family. Some relatives believed her at first, especially her sister Beverly, who had always been super close to Patty, and we started getting calls and messages from people asking what was really going on. It was super stressful because we had to explain the situation over and over, show evidence, and basically defend ourselves from ridiculous accusations. But things got worse. About 2 months after the incident with the fake lawyer, we found out Patty had lost her job. Apparently, she'd been using company resources where she worked to investigate the property, like she'd hired private investigators with the company account, had used office time to plan the whole fraud scheme, and someone in the finance department noticed it and reported her. They fired her on the spot, and obviously Patty blamed everyone except herself, called Stacy and me, saying it was our fault she'd lost her job and her reputation. Stacy told her it was her fault for being a horrible person who tried to commit a crime, and hung up. I thought maybe now that she'd lost her job and was dealing with her own problems, she'd leave us alone. But once again, I was brutally wrong. 3 months later, we received official notice of a lawsuit. Patty was formally suing us, claiming she'd made significant financial contributions to the beach house over the past 2 years and deserved compensation or partial ownership. The lawsuit was a disaster of a document, full of vague claims without any solid evidence, but we still had to respond and appear in court. I hired a colleague to represent me, because obviously I couldn't be my own lawyer in this, and we started preparing the defense. I had literally every receipt, every bank statement, every contract with contractors, every utility bill, everything organized in perfectly labeled folders because, well, I'm a lawyer and that's how I work. I had documentation proving beyond any doubt that every cent spent on that property had come from my bank account or from the joint account I had with Stacy, and that Patty had never contributed absolutely anything. The day of the court hearing was almost comical, honestly. Patty showed up with a real lawyer this time, one who looked a bit embarrassed to be there, honestly, and they presented their case, which basically consisted of claims that she'd paid for meals when we visited the beach house, that she'd bought some towels and sheets, and that once she'd paid for a pizza when we were doing repairs. Seriously, her legal argument was based on ridiculous things like that. My lawyer presented all the documentation we'd prepared, showing every transaction related to the property, and also presented the security camera recordings showing Patty entering without permission and the incident with the fake lawyer Todd. The judge, an older guy who seemed to have seen everything in his career, listened to both sides and then looked at Patty with an expression that was half disbelief and half anger. He told them, and this is practically verbatim because it stuck with me, that it was one of the most frivolous lawsuits he'd seen in years, that buying a pizza and some towels didn't constitute a significant contribution to a property valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that the evidence presented by the defense was so overwhelming he didn't understand how this had reached his court in the first place. He dismissed the case completely, without even needing to deliberate, and warned Patty that if she filed baseless lawsuits again, she could face sanctions for malicious litigation. Patty's lawyer apologized to the judge and practically ran out of there, and Patty sat in her chair, staring ahead in total shock. We left that courtroom feeling vindicated, but also exhausted, because we'd spent months of our lives and a bunch of money on lawyers defending ourselves from something completely absurd. You'd think after losing so badly in court and being basically humiliated by a judge in front of everyone, Patty would give up, right? Well, no. What happened next was that more relatives started contacting us, not to defend Patty, but to tell us stories of similar things she'd done in the past. Brenda, Stacy's cousin, called us and told us Patty had tried something similar with her grandmother's inheritance years ago, trying to manipulate the will to keep more than she was entitled to. Beverly, Patty's sister, who had initially supported her, finally realized all the drama and called us to apologize, saying Patty had been lying to her about the situation, and when she saw the court documents, she realized the truth. Even Stacy's grandma, Patty's mom, called us to say she knew her daughter had problems, but never thought she'd go this far, and not to worry because she wasn't going to support her craziness. Patty's reputation in the family basically disintegrated after that. People started sharing stories of past manipulations, of lies she'd told, of things she'd done to get her way in different situations. And this super clear pattern emerged of someone who simply believed she was entitled to everything and could manipulate people to get what she wanted. It was sad in a way because Stacy had to see her mom basically exposed as this horrible person, but it was also liberating because finally other people understood why we'd had to take such drastic measures. But Patty still wasn't done. About 6 months after the court disaster, Frank called me again, this time super upset, telling me Patty had returned to the house and had entered with tools and construction materials. When we got there, we found she'd forced entry by changing the locks that we'd changed after all the drama, and was inside with renovation plans she'd drawn herself, measuring spaces and marking walls with painter's tape, indicating where she wanted to make changes. She'd hired some contractors who obviously didn't know anything about the legal situation and had told them it was her house and she wanted to make some improvements. I called the police immediately. They arrived and arrested Patty for trespassing and property destruction because she'd started tearing down part of a wall, thinking she could do whatever she wanted. Seeing the police handcuff Patty and take her away in the patrol car was one of the most surreal moments of my life. Like I knew things had gone far, but I never imagined it would end like this. Stacy was crying, not because she felt sorry for her mom, but because the whole situation was so absurd and unnecessary, it was overwhelming. The contractors were confused and angry because Patty had apparently given them a bounce check as a down payment, so we had to explain the whole situation to them and pay them something for their wasted time because it wasn't their fault they'd been deceived. We had to repair the damage Patty had caused to the wall, change the locks again, and install an even more robust security system with instant alerts on our phones. After the arrest, Stacy made the final decision to cut all contact with her mother. She sent her a long message explaining that she couldn't have a relationship with someone who had tried to steal from her husband, who had lied to the whole family, who had lost her job through her own terrible actions, and who had been arrested for trespassing. She told her that until Patty sought serious professional help and could admit everything she'd done wrong, there would be no communication between them whatsoever. She blocked her number, her social media, everything. It was super hard for Stacy because despite everything, Patty was her mom, but she knew it was the right thing. I was super proud of my wife for setting those boundaries, honestly. It's been about 8 months since the arrest, and things are finally quiet. Patty had to do community service and probation for the trespassing, and apparently she's living with her sister Beverly now because she can't maintain her own apartment without a job. Some relatives have told us they think she finally understood she went too far, but honestly, I don't care. We changed all the access codes, the locks, and now only Frank and 2 other trusted people have emergency keys to the house. We put cameras everywhere and an alarm system that notifies us if anyone approaches the property. The beach house is finally what it always should have been, a peaceful place where Stacy and I can escape and relax. We go almost every long weekend now, and honestly, it feels like we recovered something that Patty had contaminated with all her drama. The other day we were sitting on the deck watching the sunset, drinking wine, and Stacy told me she felt free for the first time in years, that she'd always felt like she had to be defending herself from her mom on some level, but now she could finally just exist without that pressure. I grabbed her hand and told her I understood perfectly, and we just sat there in silence, enjoying the moment. That's enough for us now, I guess.